Welcome to Lord Nightmare channel. We share scary stories with rainy ambience. I hope this video helps you in some way to sleep, relax, or just be entertained for a while. If you enjoy it, please think about subscribing and hitting the thumbs up button to help my channel out. Now let's begin. This happened when I was a 19-year-old sophomore in college. I was living on campus in their apartment-style dorms, and my college wasn't exactly in the nicest part of the city, so I'd usually have to drive a bit further to go grocery shopping so that I could be in a bit more of a safer area. The night this happened, I was going to cook dinner, and I realized I didn't have some of the spices I needed. Normally I would just say forget it and made something else, but the meat had already been thawed for a day or so, and I needed to cook it. I debated just going to Walmart that was 2 minutes away, but it was getting late, and I didn't want to go there alone in the dark. The Walmart was right next to a major highway, and being a girl by herself, I felt uncomfortable risking it. So instead, I went to the Walmart that was about 20 minutes away a few towns over. I got to that other Walmart and bought my spices, along with a few other things, and checked out no problem. By the time I was done, it was now completely dark out. I was back at the driver's side of my car and putting my bags in the passenger seat when I noticed a woman. She was maybe in her 50s, looking at the back of my car. At the time I drove a really old car, and if you know your cars, it would be surprising that it was still running. I've had a few people in the past, usually older men, come up and ask me about it. I figured that this is what the lady was doing, and I ignored it until out of the corner of my eye, I saw her come around my car and stop about 2 feet away from where I was standing. I was parked next to a parking lot median, so it's not like she was getting in a car next to me. "Excuse me," she said. I turned around saying, "Yes," kind of prepared to answer, "What year or model is your car? My church is giving out leftover boxes of food from our food drive to people in need. Could I give you one? We have them in our car over there." This immediately set off an alarm in my head. I mean, she'd just seen me put groceries in my car. Why would I need anything else if I just went shopping? Also, the churches and food pantries around my college were usually cleaned out after they had their shopping days for the people who really relied on these food drives. There was hardly, if ever, anything that was just left over. I had watched enough Criminal Minds and read enough Facebook posts to know that this felt like a human trafficking lure. I stuttered over my words a bit, trying to figure out what to say, but finally got out, "No thank you. I'm good. I'd like to see it to go to someone who could really use it." I felt like that was an okay response if she was handing out boxes. "Are you sure? They're just right there over in my car," she said, taking a step and making the gap between us a little smaller. I was panicking. She was stepping closer. I tried to nonchalantly put my hand in my bag and look for the small pocket knife my dad gave me. My mind was racing as I tried to find it, but also to try and keep my face looking calm and not suspicious. I repeated to her that I was good, and the box of food should go to someone who really could use it. She finally seemed to let up, saying, "Okay, have a good night. God bless you." I told her to have a good night as well. Then as soon as her back was turned, I got into my car and locked the doors. As I pulled out of my parking spot, I noticed the car she was walking to had 3 large men standing at the trunk of the car. They were barely illuminated by the parking lot lights, but I think it was an early 2000s white Nissan. As I tried to go down the parking lot aisle, I saw the men looking at the back of my car, just like the woman had. I then noticed where their eyes were shifted to. They weren't looking at my car, they were looking at my license plate. Just as I got to the end of the aisle waiting to turn, I saw 2 of the men get into the front seat, and the other man and the woman in the back. Their car started and they began to pull out too. I was now having a full-blown panic attack, Just a week before, my friend had posted something on Facebook about how two men had followed her and her mom through a Walmart. Again, I had watched enough crime shows to know that this wasn't painting a pretty picture. I finally got the opportunity to turn, but that car was coming up behind me. I made the quick decision to make a really odd way back to campus, made a ton of turns and went through a lot of the small streets instead of taking one of the two main roads. I don't think I saw the car again after I pulled out of the parking lot, but I was definitely not risking it. By the time I got back to my college, I had calmed down a little. I started to wonder, maybe you're overthinking this, believing there are actually good people in the world, and I decided that if they were giving out boxes of food, then hopefully it did go to someone in need. That was until I walked behind my car heading towards my building. There was an SF faintly written in the white sidewalk chalk on the brown paint of my car. I was shocked and terrified, knowing that I definitely did not put that there. I said out loud, "Oh my God," as I practically dropped my bags to the ground and rushed to wipe the chalk off with the sleeve of my jacket. My car had been tagged. After a few seconds of wiping, the chalk was gone, so I locked my car, grabbed my bags and raced into my building. I got into my dorm and saw the dinner I was supposed to make, but I had completely lost my appetite. I put everything away and went to my bedroom, still reeling over what had just happened in the last 45 minutes. I said the whole story as a Snapchat video to some of my friends who were as shocked as I was. One friend, Sarah, said she thinks SF stood for single female. It made sense, which made the whole experience that much more scary. I called my mum afterwards and told her everything that happened, and by the end of that call, she was sending me an Amazon package with pepper spray in it. I didn't go out after dark or by myself for about 2 weeks after that. I'd have a friend from campus or work go with me, so I wouldn't go alone. The whole situation was terrifying, but I think the strangest part of it all was that I was supposed to have been in the safer area. I drove all the way to that Walmart because I had a bad feeling about the one that was closest to me. I started going to the Walmart nearer me after that, and I've never had a negative experience at the one closer to me since I began going. It's hard to believe all the stuff I've seen on TV and the internet could almost happen to me. I had a very creepy friend whom I'll call Ben. I believe he might be a dangerous psychopath, or at worst a serial killer. Ben and I met on Facebook in 2014, and in the summer of 2015, he came to meet me in Romania. He seemed a little odd, but otherwise fine. One strange thing about him was that during the week he stayed at my house, he didn't bathe for some odd reason, so he smelled terrible. I still showed him around Transylvania, and later, we both rented an apartment in Bucharest before his departure. We hung out in Bucharest for a bit before he left. Our friendship continued online, and in 2016, I moved back to Canada. In May of that year, I flew to Vancouver to hang out with him. Now it's important to note that this guy is a huge gun nut. He collects firearms and claims to have briefly been in the Canadian Army. He also says he worked as a mercenary in Georgia during the Russian invasion in 2008, claiming he shot 2 people there and suffers from PTSD. When I arrived at his apartment, it was filthy. I'm talking trash everywhere, and 2 cats that made the place smell like cat urine. The guy kept the lights on 24/7, and on his wall was a clock that played a loud tune every hour. His behavior toward me during my stay was somewhat disrespectful, but I brushed it off, assuming he was just messing around. He'd say mildly creepy things, but again I took them as jokes. I laughed and our friendship continued online. However, over time his conversations became darker and more hostile, though still passive-aggressive. Ben is a hardcore alcoholic who drinks until he passes out, and he did all sorts of antisocial and downright vile things while drunk. Between 2016 and 2017, he told me that two men had briefly lived with him. When I asked about what happened to them, he would change the subject quickly. After what happened in 2018, I strongly suspect something bad might have happened to those men. Fast forward to 2018, my parents and I were driving from Calgary to Vancouver. It seemed like the perfect time to meet up with Ben again for a day or two. Big mistake. Ben was traveling from Kelowna to Vancouver, and we met at a bar near his house. We had a few drinks and then he went home for the night. The next day we met up again, but his behavior was increasingly disrespectful and creepy. We went to his workplace and he subtly disrespected me and his coworkers. He put me on the spot, trying to make me look stupid in front of everyone. He was a supervisor and most of the people under him seemed too complacent or afraid to say anything. At this point I realized that he was likely a psychopath. Things took a dark turn when we went back to his place. He was drinking beer and I was rolling a joint. A movie was playing in the background and Ben was getting tipsy. By this point I started feeling very uneasy. My gut instinct was telling me to leave. It's always wise to trust your gut, that primal fight or flight response. As the day went on and Ben got drunker, his behavior became increasingly unsettling. He mumbled, "I don't care for anyone but myself. I don't give a damn about people." And then I noticed a loaded shotgun on the table beside us. He looked at his computer screen and mumbled, "I'm a madman with a gun." A few minutes later he turned to me and asked, "Hey, what if I put some MDMA in your drink?" Then he added with a chuckle, "Just messing with you. I'm just kidding around." The cat and mouse game continued. He started talking about knowing a guy who was HIV positive and how he planned to get that guy to give him an infected needle so he could contract HIV and live off government benefits for the rest of his life. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This guy was completely unhinged. I wanted to leave, but I didn't want him to know that I was ready to go. It was a terrible, vulnerable feeling. He cracked open another beer and turned to me. I was now deeply uncomfortable. The conversation shifted to food. He looked me straight in the eyes, his face cold and serious, and asked, "So if this was your last meal, what would you have?" The malice in his tone made my blood run cold. I knew I had to flee. My heart was pounding and the adrenaline was kicking in. I had to make my move. I calmly told Ben that the weed I had smoked was making me feel funny and that I needed some fresh air. I quickly put on my shoes and left before he had any chance to stop me. He made me promise I'd come back, but I didn't plan to. I went down the stairs into the sunlight, feeling like an animal that had just escaped a predator. My phone rang. It was Ben asking where I was and telling me he was panicking. I told him I was still taking a breather, all the while walking to my cousin's house. I managed to get inside safely. By nightfall, he was calling me non-stop. When I finally answered, he tried to convince me to meet up and go for a ride. His voice was flat and insincere. He said, "We just had a bad night," and kept pressing me to meet him. I blocked his number and then blocked him on social media. That was the last time I spoke to that scumbag. Over the years, during our online conversations, Ben would occasionally drop hints about his past. He talked about the terrible things he'd done as a mercenary. He'd go on drunken tirades saying he was a bad man who had done bad things. He even tried to put on a facade of normality by attending AA meetings and volunteering at an old folks' home. But deep down, I believe Ben is a psychopath, and a potentially dangerous one at that. I can only hope that he never murdered anyone other than the 2 people he allegedly shot during his combat duty. Vancouver is a sketchy place full of missing people, and I guess we'll never know. So I'm currently focusing on taking care of myself, therapy, psychiatrist, etc. Over the past few years, especially since I had a very toxic relationship, I've started noticing certain behavioral patterns I've always had. These didn't bother me before, but now they're starting to affect my daily life. Since I was young, I felt a bit invisible at school. Even though I did well academically and had high grades, most teachers and students wouldn't remember my name. They would act surprised when the rankings came out. Many teachers would read my name among the top 3 and ask, "Who is this?" One of the first things I remember doing, which seems strange looking back now, was becoming obsessed with this girl. She was a year ahead of me, Japanese, and seemed really shy. During lunch breaks, I would spend most of my time watching her, noticing who she hung out with, and so on. Over time, my interest kept growing until one day I used the lunch break to go into her classroom and look through her things, just to find her name. I managed to do it without anyone noticing. I started following her on social media out of nowhere, and she didn't even know we went to the same school. We talked for a while. I even told her I was in another class and that I was interested in her, but I never explained how I found her profile. I just said something like, "Oh, we have mutual friends." I made sure to actually have mutual friends before sending her a friend request. I remember one day, I decided to tell her things about herself that I shouldn't have known because we'd never talked about them. Her address, old blog she had, the church she attended. I started doing this to mess with her a little, but I loved how she reacted, slightly frightened, so I kept going until she was actually scared. After that, it felt too strange to maintain any kind of friendship. I had even followed her home once before and she noticed. At the time, it didn't seem like anything too problematic, just the kind of weird stuff young people do. Fast forward to today. I'm older now, I have a job, live alone, and overall have a pretty stable life. But I still deal with mental health issues, which I didn't fully understand until recently. I've had a few relationships, most of which didn't end well. Some because of things I did, others because of things people did to me. I remember feeling a strong impulse for revenge against those who broke my heart, fantasizing about stalking them, making them feel afraid, etc. I won't go into detail about every relationship, but one person I ended up dating had serious mental health issues as well. Borderline personality disorder, depression, and more. She was very wealthy, so our lives were very different. She was also younger. Every now and then she would bring up the idea of opening our relationship or mention how she and her friends thought she should enjoy life more before settling down. We began a cycle of dating and breaking up. Everything started spiraling, and each time we got back together the relationship felt more and more distorted. Eventually we both cheated on each other, and the relationship ended for good. But for some reason, my broken mind couldn't let it go. I was so hurt by everything that had happened, and this time it was much harder to resist those impulses toward violence, stalking, and instilling fear. I seemed like a normal person at work in the office, but in my mind there was this voice that really wanted vengeance. At some point it became unbearable. After work, I started hanging around places near her house, supermarkets, parks, any spot we'd gone together. I made sure she knew I was or had been there. Doing this made me feel better, less anxious. My mind would feel at peace for a while. We never talked directly about it, nor did she confront me. Eventually, I managed to get over it, and started controlling these impulses again until they disappeared. When I began treatment and started talking about all this and other issues like my lack of empathy, struggles with socialization, and mimicking emotions I didn't really feel, I began to see just how messed up these behaviors were. Now, I'm in treatment and I'm close to a diagnosis. Though since it's not 100% confirmed, I don't think it's helpful to share it here. If you're feeling things like this, seek help. I'm not the type of person who wants to give in to bad thoughts or impulses. I want to be a good person, despite everything. Apologies to anyone I may have hurt with my actions. Thank you for reading.